At 62, Charles Barkley doesn't need anyone to rewrite his story. He's the man who said, "I'm not a role model," and still earned the respect of millions who saw truth in that sentence. He never chased perfection, he chased honesty. And maybe that's why, even after all these years, people still listen when he talks about the game that made him and broke him at the same time. He never won a championship ring. He never hid behind excuses. Yet Barkley stood among giants: Bird, Magic, Jordan, Malone, and held his ground like a man who refused to bow to expectations. Behind the jokes, the laughter on TV, the wild opinions that made headlines, there's still that kid from Leeds, Alabama, who once believed that being real mattered more than being perfect. So when Charles Barkley looks back and says, "These are the 5 men I truly admired," it's not a list built on trophies or fame. It's a confession about mentorship, rivalry, and the men who forced him to grow. Each of them left a scar, a lesson, and a story that never faded. He doesn't tell it with regret. He tells it with that same mix of pride and mischief that made him who he is. Because admiration, to him, has never been about titles, it's about truth. And it all started with one man, a legend whose grace made a young Barkley believe that power could come wrapped in elegance. Let's begin with Julius Erving, the man who showed Sir Charles how greatness should look. The first time Charles Barkley saw Julius Erving walk into the locker room, it felt like watching basketball royalty in motion. The man wasn't just a superstar, he was grace wearing sneakers. Barkley was 21, overweight, loud, and unsure where he fit in a veteran Philadelphia 76ers team that had already known glory. Dr. J didn't need to say much. He looked at the rookie, smiled, and said, "You'll be fine, young fella." That sentence changed everything. Barkley came from Alabama, where toughness meant speaking loud and fighting harder. But Erving taught him another kind of strength, the kind that didn't need volume. On the court, Julius moved like a painting come to life, every step balanced between power and poetry. After one tough loss, Barkley threw his jersey, furious at himself. Erving calmly picked it up, folded it, and told him, "Act like you've been here before." No lecture, no anger, just quiet class. That was the moment Barkley understood what greatness really looked like. It wasn't about dunking over someone, it was about composure when the lights were brightest. Erving became his mirror for professionalism, shaking every hand, signing every autograph, treating everyone with the same respect he gave his peers. Years later, Barkley would admit, "Dr. J was the first man who made me believe I belonged in this league." For him, Erving wasn't just a teammate, he was a map of how to live inside chaos without losing your balance. When the season ended, Barkley no longer felt like the loud kid from Leeds. He had seen what dignity looked like in motion and had worn number 6. He would never forget that lesson. But the next man he admired didn't teach with elegance, he taught with sweat and truth, the one who made him work until the pain became progress. His name was Moses Malone. When Charles Barkley first met Moses Malone, he didn't need a friend, he met a mirror. A mirror that showed him everything he was and everything he wasn't. In his rookie year, Barkley was talented but heavy, strong but lazy, fearless but unfocused. The Sixers had seen promise in him, but not discipline. And then came Moses, a man who didn't need to talk to be heard. One morning, Malone pulled him aside and asked a question that cut straight through the noise: "How bad you want to play this game, boy?" Barkley laughed, tried to joke it off. Moses didn't smile. He pointed to the baseline and said, "Then we start running." From that day on, everything changed. They ran before practice, after practice, in the dark, when no one was watching. The gym lights flickered over sweat and silence. Barkley gasped for air, and Moses just kept saying, "Keep going." He didn't preach, he didn't scold, he showed. Slowly, Barkley dropped weight. Then the explosiveness came, the quickness, the fire. And one morning, Moses nodded and said, "Now you're ready to be Charles Barkley." Barkley never forgot those words. Malone didn't transform him through speeches, he rebuilt him through effort. He showed him that greatness isn't handed, it's earned in the quiet hours when no one claps. Years later, when Moses passed away, Barkley's voice cracked on live television. He said, "Moses Malone saved my life. He taught me how to work. He taught me how to be a man." It wasn't about basketball anymore, it was about survival, dignity, and belief. Moses Malone didn't teach Barkley how to score. he taught him how to endure. And after learning endurance, Barkley met a man who taught him obsession, a competitor who turned winning into religion. That man was Michael Jordan. When Charles Barkley talks about Michael Jordan, his tone changes, half admiration, half unfinished sentence. They entered the league around the same time, burned through the same spotlight, and for a while, shared the same laughter. Off the court, they were brothers; on the court, they were fire and gasoline. Barkley admired Jordan's obsession, the kind of focus that made everyone else look casual. He didn't just want to win, Barkley once said. He needed to. Playing against Jordan was like standing in front of a storm that refused to pass. The eyes, the silence, the way he turned anger into art, Barkley respected every bit of it. But admiration came with distance. As Jordan climbed into his dynasty, Barkley became the loud, flawed opposite, the man who spoke too honestly for comfort. In 1993, they met in the finals, Bulls vs. Suns. Barkley played the best basketball of his life, even won the MVP that season. But when the last buzzer sounded, Jordan stood with another trophy in his hands. Barkley smiled, shook his head, and said, "He's just better." That sentence wasn't surrender, it was truth. Jordan didn't need to beat him physically, he won the invisible game: preparation, mentality, silence. Years later, when their friendship faded, Barkley admitted it hurt, but he never took back his respect. "We just see life differently," he said. "But I'll always admire his fire." Jordan represented everything Barkley wasn't: controlled, guarded, relentless. Yet that's why the admiration lasted. Barkley saw in Jordan the proof that greatness isn't born from charm or humor, it's born from obsession. He learned that some rivalries don't end with forgiveness, they end with understanding. And after the storm named Jordan, Barkley found calm again in the quiet mastery of a man who barely spoke, yet said everything with movement. That man was Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem Olajuwon never raised his voice, but when he moved, the whole arena listened. For Charles Barkley, playing against him was like facing a calm ocean that could turn into a wave without warning. There was no trash talk, no stare downs, just quiet dominance. Every pivot, every fadeaway, every block felt like a prayer answered in rhythm. Barkley said once, he made the game look like meditation. When Barkley arrived in Houston late in his career, he finally shared a locker room with the man who had been his greatest challenge for years. He expected intensity, maybe tension. What he found instead was peace. Hakeem greeted him softly, "Welcome, my brother," and smiled with the same calm that once destroyed him on the court. For Barkley, it was humbling. He had spent a lifetime fighting noise, critics, coaches, media, and now stood beside a man who seemed untouched by all of it. Practices with Hakeem were lessons in patience. Olajuwon didn't lecture, he demonstrated. When Barkley tried to overpower him, Hakeem simply shifted his foot, turned his shoulder, and made the shot anyway. It wasn't strength, it was understanding. Barkley realized that some men win not because they fight harder, but because they fight quieter. During that season, there were nights Barkley would watch him pray before games, eyes closed, palms open. It wasn't superstition, it was balance. Hakeem carried faith the way others carried fire. And for the first time, Barkley saw greatness not as domination, but as serenity. When he retired, Barkley said, "Playing with Hakeem taught me to breathe." It was a simple line, but it meant everything. Olajuwon showed him that control wasn't about holding on, it was about letting go. And when Barkley thought of the men he admired most, there was one left, a rival who mirrored his toughness, his pride, and his unbreakable will. That man was Karl Malone. Charles Barkley and Karl Malone were never close, but they understood each other better than most friends ever could. They came from the same kind of places, small towns, hard work, no shortcuts. When they met on the court, it was never about hatred, it was about pride. Each man carried his own armor, his own scars, and neither was willing to bend first. Barkley used to say, "You always knew what you were getting with Karl Payne." Malone wasn't flashy, he was mechanical, precise, relentless. Night after night, he ran the floor like a freight train, setting bruising screens, hitting mid-range jumpers, absorbing contact that would have broken other men. Barkley admired that. He called it blue-collar greatness. The mailman never missed a delivery, and that reliability made him both feared and respected. Their battles were brutal but clean, two forces colliding out of mutual respect. Barkley could drop 30, Malone would drop 31. No words, just nods. They didn't need trash talk to make a statement. The statement was endurance. And for all his charisma off the court, Barkley saw something in Malone that he didn't have: a quiet commitment, a devotion to structure. There was tension too. Barkley questioned authority, Malone trusted it. Barkley played from emotion, Malone played from routine. Yet, beneath those contrasts was understanding. Both had carried the weight of being the best without a ring. Both had felt the sting of watching Jordan lift another trophy while they stood in the shadows of almost. Years later, Barkley said, "Karl and I weren't friends. We were reflections. He showed me my flaws by being everything I wasn't." That honesty defined his admiration, not envy, but recognition. Malone taught Barkley that toughness isn't about shouting louder or playing angrier. It's about showing up every single night, no matter the pain. And when the battles ended, and the noise faded, Barkley knew, respect doesn't need words. It needs memory. At 62, Charles Barkley no longer measures his life by championships or stat sheets. He measures it by honesty, the one thing he never compromised. In a league built on image and perfection, he stayed imperfect and proud of it. He didn't want to be everyone's hero. He wanted to be himself, even when that meant standing alone. Looking back, the 5 men he admired most weren't just names in a record book. They were chapters of his own becoming: Erving's grace, Malone's discipline, Jordan's obsession, Olajuwon's peace, and Malone's resilience. Each of them carved something into him, shaped the man behind the voice, the analyst, the truth-teller. They were reminders that greatness wears many faces, some calm, some fiery, all unforgettable. Barkley knows now that legacy isn't about how many rings you hold. It's about what people remember when you're gone: the laughter, the honesty, the courage to say what others wouldn't. He stood up, fell hard, spoke loud, and lived real. That's why fans still listen when he speaks. Because through every headline and every laugh, they still hear the echo of that kid from Alabama who refused to fake it. In the end, Barkley's story isn't about perfection. It's about truth, the kind that survives criticism, outlasts fame, and keeps its dignity when the lights fade. So, when Sir Charles says, "These are the men I admired," it feels less like a list and more like a thank you from one warrior to another. If you remember watching Barkley play, the power, the honesty, the fire, share your memories in the comments. And if these stories brought back the sound of old arenas and hardwood echoes, don't forget to subscribe. The past still has something to say.